this is Christian Buckley with CollabTalk.
Hi, this is Michal Sobotkiewicz with KanBo.
And we're talking about today the Microsoft Graph. And it's something that is an increasingly important topic. And having come back from Microsoft Ignite in Orlando, and this is one of those topics that touches on so many different features, so many different announcements that came out of Microsoft last week, but is an increasingly important story to any solutions that are within the certainly Office 365 and SharePoint space, but because it is the Microsoft Graph is it's an important part of the Microsoft 365 story as well, but it's a way of capturing and connecting information across all of the Microsoft properties, and so I don't know. I mean, today, Michael. I mean, what's your take on the graph and its importance in what you're doing with KanBo?
All right, so we find that graph is actually a logical step and kind of a release, because see, today when we have in KanBo, we want to talk to SharePoint, because basically that's where we get the most services nowadays from the Microsoft stack. We use the CSON, so we talk to the, let's say, to the infrastructure of Office 365, but through a dialect of SharePoint. And then suddenly we have this Outlook app, and this Outlook app needs to convert an email that is actually hosted by Exchange and put it into KanBo. So we suddenly need to speak another dialect, which is the Exchange dialect. Then we want to put some signals into Delph, and then we need to talk Delph, and you know, we need to talk to Dynamics, and then we need to talk Dynamics. So we need to speak in many languages, and imagine we could all speak English with them, like one language, and then that's basically what Graph API is about. It's about having one API that contains all the elements that are contained by the Office 365. But if you look at the past, right, like Microsoft is having around, I don't know, 20 products, and some of them make it into the cloud, like SharePoint, like Lync or Skype, and like Exchange, and now they are like separate products, but they are sold as one piece. So they needed to come up with something that is also a single piece API, which is the Graph API. And now they are coming up with new products. Like the first one is the groups, like
groups and teams.
SharePoint piece is this, and so
right.
on. So,
Yep.
so what to talk, how to talk to them. So now you come and you say, okay, there's a Graph API, and you can say like, I want to create a new team in a new group. Then this is only available through Graph API, because there is actually no product on-premise or something like that behind it. So this is, for us, is a great release. If it wouldn't be any better all the time, you know. So I mean, you know, calling it and having in the call URL this string better makes us a little bit uncertain of the investment, but there's no other way.
Well, it's something we know that, right, because it's not finished by any means. It's still out there. You know, it's out there. It's live. Microsoft is talking extensively about it. I was just going to back up, say like this concept of having this kind of universal API to connect these disparate systems. I mean, that's not a new concept. You know, in the 90s and the early 2000s, and I was working with, you know, supply chain collaboration technology. It was much the same. We used to speak to each other. We get different applications, different systems, different networks using EDI, for example. It was just very expensive, and the internet dropped a lot of that. You know, it reduced the cost of that communication immensely. It went from being hundreds of dollars, if not thousands of dollars per connection to you know, tens of dollars for a subscription for a month to be able to communicate as much as you want between these systems. But what is the limitations of the Graph API? And it's more than just yes, it's a common communication, the language between them, but it's also then finding patterns and understanding the connections between data. And by having that linked together, so that you have, for example, I mean, in database management, you've got various keys to open up and connect different databases to each other, and pairing and joining those data sets is something that takes effort and to go through, and then you have these massive subsets of data just getting increasingly large, so that you have this intelligence to understand how these systems come together. What the graph does is it leverages the scale of the internet to be able to go and make these connections and look at the these connections between data types, between these different data systems in real time, and understand their relationship back to like you as a user, to understand that like you, Michael, are part of a team of 20 people and understand that relationship. Well, then also to go and look at the relationships of those 20 people in your organization to the other 20 to 50 people each, and all back to you to be able to recognize that as you work on something new, and that would say, hey, you may benefit from this project that's being done 2 tiers away, people that you've never come in contact with, but because of the graph, because of the connections, it's able to identify this and not just say, hey, this data is available, but actually in context, in relation to a relevant communication back to the thing that you're working on. I mean, there's just a lot of computing power that's behind finding that. And it's why it really either you owned massive computing grids of server farms to be able to pull this together internally in your organization, or to leverage the internet to go and do this. And so the Graph API is that effort to, I don't know, to put it simply, connect everything together and to understand the relationships of everything, so that when you go to search, and we'll talk about a couple specific scenarios, because it's when you talk about in these broad ways, it's difficult to then go and say, okay, how does this apply to me in a specific working scenario? Maybe you could enlighten me. Like if I'm working on a project, I'm I'm a project manager in a large organization. I've created a board that with all these project activities that I'm working in SharePoint, I'm working with, I've got meetings that I'm running in Teams and in Skype, and I'm collecting all of this data down together. From a KanBo perspective, how would the graph work if all these pieces, as it matures and it's adding things out, but just adding new capabilities in, as this all matures, what's the vision of how this would actually work?
Okay, so so when I spoke before you just explained the power of the graph, I meant mostly for us now consuming the API to speak to Office 365.
Right.
And just to finish up this thought is, by changing now the provisioning system of KanBo from SharePoint hosted app to from SharePoint provider hosted app into Azure hosted app, actually opens for us the possibility to consume or to talk to the Office 365 through Graph API, and it is actually a full coverage insurance for us, because whenever Microsoft comes up with new products like Stream or whatever, they will automatically extend the Graph API by those function calls. So we will use the same authentication and so on and so on. And we will say, one day we want to have streamed conversations in cards, we will just need to call another set of functions, that's it, which is beautiful. But what you just talked about is the graph. So an algorithm that is able to examine to go deep into the data and then get out some insights, which I can again consume, and based on those insights I can build you a dashboard for a certain purpose. So let's say if I am working on a card and I would like to know whether there is a similar cards or similar topics being worked right now somewhere in Hong Kong.
Mm-hmm.
Then I would use our own, let's say, engine that was built for cards and for those signals that are given by cards. But I would also like to ask the graph, the huge and mighty graph of Microsoft. If there are maybe other, documents or maybe sites or maybe some teams in Microsoft Teams that are related to that, and then presented to the user as a single page or results. So then he doesn't have to care about where it comes from, because all the magic was already done by the huge machinery of Microsoft Graph. And this graph is open for me to an API, so I can consume it. And how I will build the real context that's giving the end user an added value, is actually, that's what we are doing all the time. We are trying to understand what the user needs and how to construct it the best way possible. And the graph is the algorithm, and the API enables us to consume it and to build it as we think is the most appropriate. That's how I see the whole story here.
I think that's a great, again, the great delineation of the capabilities. There's the signals that comes in and the intelligence that it provides to allow you, as you mentioned, to that discovery process. But I think it is more important that, not that that's not important, but it is more important to say that, well, look, as the technology grows and changes and shifts, as new products are developed, that what the graph API provides is instant plug-in to those new capabilities, so that it's not just that because Microsoft is thinking, hey, as we go in and create something like Teams, and Teams automatically plugs in and plugs into the graph, plugs into the the group's infrastructure that's enabled through that, but is able to instantly draw from the permissions that are already there. It's almost like lighting up a new feature. While it could be a complete standalone product with new ways of doing things, or things that we can't even imagine yet that are it's just entirely new. However, leverage all of that infrastructure through the Graph API, being able to pull data, being able to pull the permissions, being able to understand who you are and the relationships of your teams, and to be able then to light up those new features because of having that connection. You as a product company, KanBo, can leverage it exactly the same way. You're already working within SharePoint, already working within Office 365, working within Teams, for example. And so new features come out, new products are added within that. You instantly have a story of, here's how KanBo would work with this new product.
So I can talk to those new services and products, but I can also consume data, but not raw data, already polished, already data that is meaningful, and I don't need to waste my resources to find that out. I just ask, from this user, show me all users around him in context of.
Right. So you're not recreating all of those profiles. You're not recreating all those other data. Exactly. It relates it.
And I think if I can give a tip to the all that are building products, that's actually where you can say, if you compare to the products outside of the ecosystem of Office 365, say like, look, I have a feature that does this magic, and you actually needed maybe 5 days to program it, and the others would have to, I don't know, to put 1 year work into it, because they don't have a similar service that is actually feeding your service with already polished and contextful data. That's actually the benefit why being part of this big ship.
Right. A great example of this is Microsoft went and acquired LinkedIn. So they didn't go create this new thing. They acquired this company, which has a massive graph. And that's exactly, this is a great example of how this actually works. So most people are familiar with LinkedIn. It's this business social network. It is unlike Facebook. I mean, it's very focused. It's very targeted, very rich data. It's used for business. it's probably the best place to do digital advertising right now because you can focus in on specific roles and things out there. So you have this data that's out there. So Microsoft can leverage LinkedIn by joining together, expanding the Microsoft graph and connecting to the LinkedIn graph, pull in all of that rich profile data, so that you can now, if you're a user of, within like Dynamics 365, but even within like SharePoint, as I go do a SharePoint people search, I'm looking for experts. It's then leveraging, again, through the permissions, which are all still there, still in place, the people who are in this project that I have access to, now pulling in all of that LinkedIn data and attaching that to those profiles. Again, based on my permissions, I'm able to see the depth around this person's profile through that SharePoint experience, through that project experience, leveraging these other capabilities. And that wasn't possible before. It would have been a merging of this data, basically duplicating it across two locations before just being able to link to these graphs and bring them together.
So now look, if they continue this will definitely be possible to access through the Graph API. So suddenly KanBo can be dealing or can be using the profiles of LinkedIn, of course, in all the controlled way and everything.
Right.
But we imagine how exact the results would be if you look for information or for experts that are working on similar cards and stuff like that. We could show them right away. If you enter the card, you see like, by the way, these are the experts that can help you when this is your working piece, and this will be like a service that we can put on top. And the effort for us to do it is just to enable and just call the right function and deliver in a nice graphical way the results. But imagine what is the machinery behind all the resources, the servers, the data. Impossible.
Right. And one of the other announcements out of Ignite was that Microsoft is trying to create that unified profile card based on all these pieces. So they're trying to consolidate these things. And then that means that now KanBo just has to go to one place to be able to draw from that profile and to work with and add to that. And so it is able to streamline these and remove these duplications, streamline those kinds of activities, and make it easier for vendors to connect into all of those Microsoft systems as well.
Yes.
So anyway, it's a fascinating area. I know there's a lot to read on. Both you and I were just talking about trying to catch up with the announcements, making sure we didn't miss anything that came out of the Microsoft Ignite event. But for folks that have not really read in depth around the Microsoft Graph and to understand that it is such an important part of Microsoft's future, it's worth going in and understanding the basics of how it works. I highly recommend that people go in and do some reading and just understand how that works. Incorporate that into your language and how you talk about the technology, certainly, because it's going to continue to play an important role for the Microsoft ecosystem.
I would even say that this is going to be the new standard. It's a new standard here, and it's not like you can not use it or not being informed about it. It actually ensures your future if you want to stay in the game.
Right. The graph is the new, and this may not be relevant, be familiar to everybody, but there's the old Palmolive ads in the U.S. with Madge sitting there where you're already soaking in it. You're already using the graph today. If you are touching a Microsoft product, you're in the graph there. I'm sure there's some other comparisons we can make to the Matrix, and we're living in the Matrix now here. But Michael, hey, thanks a lot for your time on this important topic, and I know we're going to be talking about this again in the future.
Thanks a lot.